Hello everyone, welcome to PUIC Pro's last webinar of the year. Today we'll be talking about key technology and privacy events and trends that will affect marketing strategies in 2022. To make this discussion interesting, we've invited a fantastic panel of experts. Let's meet them. Laura Debol, of counsel in the Brussels office of Wilson Sonsini Goodrich & Rosati. Hi Laura.
Hi Domenica.
Elias Kram, the owner and founder of Marketing Guys, the #1 agnostic agency in the Netherlands. Hi, Elias.
Hi there, nice to meet you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. Cornelius Wheat, Group Data Protection Officer at AO, the company behind the world's most popular ad blocking extension, AdBlock Plus. Hi, Cornelius.
Hey, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Christophe Alves, French entrepreneur and the CEO of Scaly, a digital marketing hub based in Paris. Hi, Christophe.
Hi, everyone.
And Maciej Zawadziński, CEO at PUIC Pro, MarTech and AdTech expert. Hi, Maciej.
Hi, everyone.
Before we start, a short information for our audience. There is a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions, just type them into the chat window as we go, and we will try to answer all of your questions at the very end of the webinar. And now let's start the discussion. And first, we will start with recapping the events of 2021 that influenced marketing actions of many businesses. Laura, let's start with you. In your opinion, what would be the most important event of 2021 and why?
Thanks, Domenica, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. Very happy to be here. So maybe just for the background, our firm, Wilson Sonsini, is a Silicon Valley-based firm. We have offices worldwide, including in Brussels, where I'm based. And we advise clients in many different sectors, including in the ad tech sphere. And I think a lot has happened in that sector this year. Many different important developments that the other speakers will address. And I would like to just talk about the Noib cookie banner campaign. So what's Noib? It stands for None of Your Business. And it's the non-profit organization of Max Schrems, who you all know. Noib is also called the European Center for Digital Rights. They're based in Austria. And I heard they're opening an office in the Netherlands as well. And just for your background, in case you don't know, but Noib is also behind the invalidation of Safe Harbor and then Privacy Shield. And this year, they launched a campaign against cookie banners that they considered were unlawful. So what they did is they developed a software that recognizes various types of cookie banners and automatically generates complaints to data protection authorities. And they announced that they would scan up to 10,000 websites this year. So Noib sent draft complaints to companies who had banners that they considered were not compliant. And when they send these draft complaints to companies, they gave them a deadline of 1 month to comply. And then they checked who had changed their banners. And for those that hadn't changed their banners, they filed complaints with regulators across the EU. So, what were their concerns really? Many of the banners didn't have a sort of easy reject all feature. I think that was one of the key concerns. Another key concern was that banners often use what they refer to as dark patterns to sort of urge users to click the accept button, for instance, by putting that button in a different color than a reject button. So various sort of issues with cookie banners, and a lot of companies receive these complaints. They often did have a quite detailed cookie banner, but arguably, not sufficiently clear and not providing a reject all cookies option, which is not stated in the law, but it's Noib's interpretation of the law. And many companies just changed their banner rather than risking a complaint with a regulator. But still, NOIP filed over 400 formal complaints with DPAs, data protection authorities, in 10 different countries. So I think it's important here to look at the context, which is that already last year, the French Data Protection Authority, the CNIL, fined Google and Amazon for a total of 135 million euros for failure to provide adequate information about cookies and obtain users' consent. And also around the same time as the NOIP complaints, the CNIL started its own cookie banner review campaign and applied similar criteria as NOIP. So I think the result of all of this is that we've really seen a change in cookie banners this year. They've become more granular and make it easier for users to reject all cookies. So then I guess the question is, how is this impacting the industry? Companies will probably obtain less consents to tracking cookies than before with these new banners, which may result in actually having more paid services. Another reason why I think this is significant is because this may actually force regulators in the EU to come to a more common approach on this topic. We've seen in the past guidelines from various different supervisory authorities, French, Spanish, Italian, they've all issued guidelines on cookie consent, and they all have their own sort of particular concerns. They're not all fully aligned. So with these NOIP complaints, the EDPB, which brings together all the national supervisory authorities in Europe, set up a task force to coordinate the response to these complaints. So this could actually create some more harmonization on this topic. So just some quick points on what I think were important developments this year. So with that, back to you, Dominika.
Thank you, Lara. It was very interesting to hear for sure. Elias, would you want to tell us what would be your pick if you were to choose one main thing for this year?
Sure. So at Marketing Guys, my company, we serve mainly B2B customers worldwide, and we help them to select their marketing technology stack. So that could be marketing automation, real-time dashboarding, CDPs, whatsoever. So the average marketer uses like 40 tools in their stack, and we help them select that and be successful with that. And besides that, I'm also the host of the Marketing Technology Podcast. And the main thing that I've seen this year is the integration of tools being very important, because before 2021, when people selected tools, they mainly were looking for specific features of a tool. So selecting a marketing technology or automation tool, for example, would be like, does it do lead nurturing? Does it do this? Does it do that? And the main question people currently have is, does it integrate with the rest of my MarTech stack? So does my CDP integrate with my CRM? Does it integrate with my dashboard? Does it integrate into my marketing automation tool? I think that's the main thing I've seen this year, is that integration of marketing technology tools is a very important trend.
Thank you, Elias. Cornelius, what would be your pick for a main trend or event of this year?
Yeah, thanks, Dominika, for inviting me. And I would like to pick up one point that Laura raised, which brings me to one observation, which was probably on the mind of a lot of privacy pros working in digital advertisement and marketing. And this relates to Schrems, so the same Max Schrems behind NOIP and his famous ruling Schrems 2 by the courts last year. Let me quickly recap. In 2020, in July, we had the Schrems 2 ruling by the European Court of Justice with two main findings. One, the Privacy Shield, which was the agreement to transfer data from the EU to the US, was declared invalid. That framework was not deemed future-proof, mainly because of the surveillance practices in the US and the surveillance laws over there. And secondly, you had the standard contractual clauses, which are a EU-approved template or standard contract that you can base your data transfers on. And these standard contractual clauses were deemed still valid, but the court put additional requirements for companies on top of it when using them. So all that happened in 2020, and I'm pretty sure most of you are very familiar with that. What I see as one very important takeaway from this year is that the actual findings of the court were really brought into action in 2021. What I mean by that is, for example, we had in June the European Data Protection Board, as mentioned by Laura, the group of all national DPAs coming together. They issued their final recommendations on supplementary measures, and by that giving a very, very important document and piece of guidance to companies all over the world to see how they can relate on data transfers in the future and which supplementary measures they need to implement. Also in June, we saw the European Commission adopting new standard contractual clauses, meaning the ones that were assessed and criticized by the European Court of Justice were replaced, and there are now some, there were 2 transition periods given by the European Commission. I can go into that into more detail later on. And we also see about a month ago, we saw another very relevant guidance by the European Data Protection Board, which relates to the interplay of the territorial scope of GDPR. So Article 3 of the law and Chapter 5 of GDPR, which covers the international transfers. So having said that, you could really see that data flows, even though the Schrems II ruling is already 1.5 years ago, they are still a moving target. And I believe that especially in marketing and ad tech, companies are really investing a lot in getting this right. And I think it's very important for those industry to come together in rounds like this to share some best practices and ideas around that. I see that happening all through 2021, and this is why I picked this one as one of my key events.
Thank you, Cornelius. It seems like we have a lot of privacy-related changes in marketing this year. What do you think, Christoph? What would be your pick then?
Thanks, Dominika. As mentioned by my colleague, I fully agree that collecting data, as mentioned by Elias, is one of the key topics for any, I would say, marketer now in the industry. And at the same time, collecting the consent linked to the data that you are collecting is also a key requirement. So at Skelly, as our job is to ease such process, of collecting online and offline data, what we've seen is more and more problems of using, for instance, just the pixel from Facebook to collect data from any event that we can occur on the website. Such event could be like I click on the banner, of course I saw a picture, or I saw a page, etc. And the reason why we are, having problem now for any marketer using the pixel from Facebook is indirectly linked to the regulation we just mentioned. Could be linked to the e-privacy law, for instance, because now we have to have a clear consent, as mentioned by Laura. And as part of this evolution, and also the evolution of the web browser, which are now blocking the third-party cookies collection. Not all of them, because as you may know, some of them are still offering this opportunity until 2022, which originally was end of 2022, and now it's going to be 2023 for Chrome, for instance. But other web browser like Firefox, for instance, are already blocking it. So as part of this blocking or restriction, we are lacking data as part of the marketing strategy that any marketer want to, I would say, to have. So Facebook decided to put in place a new tool, which is called Conversions API. And the goal of this Conversions API, as of today, is to complete, I would say, in a way, what the data that you can still collect from the pixel, because you can still collect some data. And the idea of completing such data is also indirectly to avoid the problem linked to the collection of consent, of course, but also to complete it in the way that, because the pixel was focusing only on online data, but also to provide offline data to Facebook. So one of the key things we've seen at Skelly during this year is more and more usage if we just focus on Facebook, which is one of the main data source in Europe, obviously with Google. If we would have had this discussion in Asia, we may have been talking about other, I would say, let's say player like Tencent, for instance. But if we focus on Facebook, the usage of the Conversions API is now helping to or let's say replacing the usage of the pixel in a way that now marketer can first get the consent clearly and keep a track of such consent, because now the data is no longer going from the website directly to the Facebook Business Manager account, but this data is collected from the web browser and is feeding the Facebook Business Manager. So one of the key things, again, we've seen is more and more usage of such technology in order to aggregate much more knowledge internally, in order for marketers to be able to still perform some attribution and I would say contribution strategy, as well as to do some retargeting or lookalike campaign on Facebook.
Thank you, Christophe, very much.
Welcome.
And let's close this recap round with Maciej. Maciej, if you were to pick an event or a trend of this year that is marketing related, what would you choose?
I think I would say that we failed at finding some technological solutions to third-party cookies, and Christophe mentioned that this was delayed by Google, so they will stay at least with Chrome. With other browsers, they are already blocked. But the underlying reason for that is there were new standards that would help us manage the remarketing, such as Flock and Pledge, and none of them are nearly here with us. The problem with Flock was that it was quickly terminated after the early beta tests, because they actually, instead of making the visitors more like increasing our privacy protection, the issue that they created is that they could be actually used for fingerprinting, which decreased the privacy of the visitors. And we are also nowhere near with the Pledge solution. So I think it's clear that the industry needs some solution, but Google, that was supposed to be the player who will push this forward and establish some industry standards, didn't succeed with that. And to finish that failure, I think this was like a year of failure for Google, was that IAB framework that they adopted, and they say, okay, you can use IAB Europe transparency consent framework, was found unlawful. It wasn't a surprise, because I think everyone who was deep into the privacy topics knew that their cookie banners are not complying with what Laura said, that they are actually broadcasting the data no matter what we click. But at least this was officially confirmed, and now publishers need to find some technological solutions for monetization of their inventory, and they are not nearly there. So it will be interesting year ahead to see like what comes next. But definitely we didn't move forward. I think we took one step backward in terms of finding a solution.
Thank you, Maciej, and thank you everyone for this round. Actually, you said interesting to see what comes next, and this is my next question to all of you in our next section. Actually, now that we have recapped this year, let's talk about what will happen next year and about your predictions. So let's say what technology, what marketing, and what privacy trends will affect the strategies in 2022. And maybe let's start with Elias. Elias, what would be your predictions for next year?
So Dominika, I'm very sorry, there is some loud noise here above me. So I'm gonna quickly change places internally here. So I'll be back in 2 minutes, but please ask the question later after you've done the other, because there's someone is making a lot of noise here.
It often happens with live events that we can't predict everything. Thank you, Elias. I will get back to you. So maybe Cornelius, would you like to answer my question and tell me what would be your prediction for 2022?
Yes, thanks. I can try to answer this, and so far nobody is hammering around in my office, so I'm all good. I have to say as a disclaimer, I'm personally notoriously bad in making predictions. So yeah, my fantasy football team, I always pick the wrong players and estimate the wrong scores. So under that caveat, I definitely thought about what predictions I would have from a privacy law perspective. And as I talked about data transfers and Privacy Shield, my call for 2022 would be that we most likely won't see a new Privacy Shield being adopted. Let me quickly explain what I mean by that. Right after the ruling of Schrems II and declaring Privacy Shield invalid, you saw that the diplomatic teams from both the EU and the US met for first talks and plenary negotiations, where they discussed about a possible successor of Privacy Shield to re-establish this umbrella agreement to ensure data flows between the EU and the US. Those meetings usually happen behind closed doors, so it's hard for me as an outsider to really understand what's being negotiated. But when you look at the reports and the news articles usually published after those meetings, you see that there are quite some mixed messages. Some attendees usually say, yeah, they are quite optimistic. They think Privacy Shield 2.0 is very close. Others are more pessimistic or don't want to comment as such. And I personally, from my perspective and from my reading of the Schrems II ruling, I have a hard time imagining that we see a Privacy Shield 2.0 anytime soon. The main reason for that is, on the one hand, that's my first point, related to the surveillance laws in the US. And in my reading of the Schrems II ruling, I don't see that you can comply with the court's finding without really changing the national security practices over there, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. And the second point, on the other hand, is that I believe there is a lot of political will and incentives to have a very, very robust and strong and future-proof agreement in place. We always speak about Schrems II for a reason, because there was a Schrems I. There was Safe Harbor in 2015 that was also declared invalid by the courts. Then we had Privacy Shield, a successor of Safe Harbor, that was declared invalid by the courts. And now I think in Brussels, there are a lot of key stakeholders that don't want to go through that a third time and come up now with a EU-US transfer agreement just to have that rebunked by the courts again in a couple of years. So my take is that we won't see Privacy Shield 2.0 in 2022. I would love to be proven wrong, though, because it would make my day-to-day job a lot easier if we would have something like this in place. And yeah, as said in the beginning, my predictions are usually wrong anyway, so we might see one at the end. Let's see.
Thank you, Cornelius. I can see that Elias is back with us. I will get back to you at the end of this round. And now, if you could, Laura, what would be your prediction for the next year? I think we have a bit of trouble. Oh,
yes,
yeah, you're back.
My mouse got blocked. I had some trouble going to the unmute button. Sorry for that. So I'm looking at it from a legal angle, and I think we're going to see more complaints with regulators, more enforcement by regulators, more litigation before courts, and that's going to impact market practices around, cookie banners, cookie consent tools, and just, I think, ethic practices in general. So, you've got the NOIP campaign that's ongoing. They already have complaints pending before 10 different supervisory authorities. So I think we're going to be seeing some developments in those proceedings. Apart from those complaints, I think some supervisory authorities are also just going to focus on this at their own initiative. Many supervisory authorities have updated their cookie guidance in recent years. They've taken already action to enforce these rules. In particular, the CNIL is active on this. I expect that this is going to continue next year. And actually, the CNIL today announced that they're continuing their cookies campaign. They said they've already sent about 90 mise en demeure, so formal notices to websites. In particular, on that issue of failing to make it as easy to reject cookies as to accept cookies. So, and I think in general, regulators are focusing on AdTech. For instance, the Dutch DPA, they've announced that they're focusing on advertising as one of their key priorities for the coming years. And it's not just the regulators, it's also privacy activists, I guess, if you can call them that way. You've got a collective action against Salesforce and Oracle in the Netherlands about their role in behavioral targeting of internet users, and that case has been pending for a while, so we might see some developments there as well next year. And it's going to be interesting to see if in the context of litigation, compensation is awarded, because it would be for immaterial damages. And if that case is successful, then for sure we're going to see more group actions in the EU. And I think that's a general trend. You've got more and more of these sort of NOIB-style organizations. You've got that group action in the Netherlands brought by Privacy Collective. In Belgium, there's an organization called Ministry of Privacy. So several of these organizations are emerging. And just one point to add to that, and that kind of ties to what Cornelius was saying. Often there's an international data transfer angle to these cases because many of the big players in AdTech are in the US and transfer data to the US. So it's going to be interesting to see how regulators and courts take a position on that. And I think another development that might be more helpful to businesses is that I think we might see some more harmonization in Europe. I already mentioned there's a bit of a lack of harmonization with regulators issuing their own guidelines. The CNIL is really focused on that reject all button for your cookie banners. Then the Italian regulator issued guidance saying, well, you should be able to just not make any choice and just click your banner away. So you need to have an X in the corner of your banner. And then you've got the Belgian DPA that's going after IAB's consent framework, which is interesting as well. And they've just sent their draft decision to other supervisory authorities. They're going to be giving their feedback in the coming weeks. So all of that is going to be very interesting to follow, and hopefully it will result in some more harmonized approach. And then if I may, just the last point, there's also the Digital Services Act. That's a new law that's in the making. It's intended to sort of strengthen the rules for online platforms, and is going to also apply to just online advertising practices. And I read that the Parliament is close to finding its position on the draft act, and that may include a ban on targeted advertising, maybe not a broad ban, maybe just a ban for targeted advertising for minors. So it remains to be seen, but that's for sure going to impact the AdTech sector.
Thank you, Laura. I can hear that both you and Cornelius predict a lot of changes related to the privacy. Christoph, would you agree? What would be your pick for the 2022? Is it also privacy related or maybe another thing?
No, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I fully agree with my colleagues. I would say that what I strongly believe is that more and more brands will have to match the consent and the data they have. As indirectly mentioned by all my colleagues, we've seen two main topics. One, which is how you can collect online and offline data, which is still a nightmare for all companies. I mentioned by Elias, for instance. And on the other side, we've seen that there is more and more regulation and maybe new one which will appear. But at the end, as a marketer of any brands, when you have some data, you need to value your data. I mean, how you value your data, you use it for personalization or recommendation processes, or you use it in order to build a nice dashboard in terms of attribution and contribution, as I mentioned before, just to understand what is going well or not well in terms of marketing, I would say, capabilities that you are putting on the table. So if we think about that, again, and if we take into account all the regulation which will be now in place or we might appear in the future, we will now have to think how we collect the data and how we map such data into any IT infrastructure in a way that we make sure that the usage of the data will be compliant, okay? And in order to do that, you will have, and any marketing department will have to think with, of course, the DPO and the IT team, how to collect all the information that will be useful to make sure that we are compliant, okay? Data by data, if I am a data subject, if I call any company, I need to understand what type of data they have regarding me. But on the other way around, the marketer need to understand when they have some data, how long they can keep the data, for what purpose the data was collected, and so on and so forth. So, talking about that and keeping in mind all the regulation coming into effect, and also the problem of collecting of data, I strongly believe that now more and more CDP vendors or other, I would say, actor in the industry which aim at collecting data regarding customer will focus no longer only on offering like functions to personalize or the customer journey or such type of things, but also to maintain the privacy of the data, okay? And that's what I strongly believe and what we've seen so far, even last year at Scali.
Thank you, Christophe. Maciej, what would be your prediction or a key trend for the upcoming year?
I will come back to some of the topics that I mentioned as a key things that happened in 2021. So I think we will not find a single solution for replacing third-party cookies, but there will be another extension. So there will be probably some solution that will be adopted by Chrome, different by Firefox and Safari, perhaps by Edge as well. So there will be different solutions to, for example, handle remarketing or to handle target interest groups that will be privacy friendly, but they won't be unified. So we'll end up with some fragmented solutions on the market, and the MarTech and AdTech vendors will have to bear the cost of adjusting their solutions to actually implement these solutions in their platforms. The second thing I think that can happen next year is that we saw the changes in iOS App Store with the additional privacy protections. I think a similar thing will be followed in Android, maybe not that extreme, but I think a similar solution will happen on Android and Play Store. So there will be more privacy protections for apps that we download and more oversight on which apps have access to what on my phone, and how the data is used by the app publisher. And I think that the third thing that might be interesting to watch, Laura mentioned there is a bit of lack of harmonization in Europe, but I think we enjoy the fact that we have more or less the same law. In the US, every state is working on something completely different, or not working on it at all. I think the next year may be a year where there will be some serious federal privacy law efforts, probably not coming up with the law yet, but I think maybe there will be some significant development in that area, because that topic is a bit, I think, not taken care of as it should be. And all the countries around the world, or all developing and developed countries around the world, are already having some new modern privacy law or are working on them. And I think US will try to catch up as well. And that may actually help in establishing their position with Europe, and perhaps this will be a moment once they have something like that to discuss the privacy shield again with Europe, when they will be able to guarantee certain protections by law.
Thank you, Maciej. And I will try Elias one more time. Hopefully it will work this time. Elias, what would be your prediction for the key trend for the upcoming year?
Yeah, sorry for the slight interruption. It was our neighbors here, our company neighbors have decided to start hammering on the floor. I don't know what's happening, but I decided to go one level below, and it should be slightly on the background now. So the trends that I and that we've seen for the next year, apart from the MarTech integration trend that we've already seen starting this year, has to do with a lot of stuff that Christoph said and Cornelius also said, is that when you combine those tools, and the average marketer again uses like 30-40 tools, all those tools result in, let's say, piles of data. All these tools produce data that needs to be stored somewhere, that is in all kinds of separate silos and databases. And the thing that we see now is that a lot of companies have issues with data integrity, which results in two major problems. First of all, the legal one that a couple of people already have referred to, like you have to comply to GDPR or some American standards or Asian standards. And if you're registering all your data in all kinds of different tools, now which one is leading? So that's one of the results from that data collection. The other one is just on an operational level, because we hear a lot about GDPR issues, but if you don't have your data in order in the right way, in the right system, marketers don't know how to operate campaigns anymore. So how do you make the right segments, the right audiences, etc., for your campaign? So it's also got an operational problem which you have there. And in a recent study that we did, we've recently done a B2B benchmark in Europe. We also found out that only, let's say, 40% of marketing departments claim to be to have enough knowledge about data and analytics. So almost 60%, I think it's 59% of them indicated that they don't have enough knowledge about data and analytics. So that's something we need to work on. Another trend, apart from data integrity, that we see happening a lot is the upcoming of sales technology. So marketing technology and marketing automation, all the marketing technology stuff has been there for 10 years. A lot of people in marketing know those visuals, like there's like thousands of marketing tools around at the moment. And we see the same happening for sales now. Within sales, the main system used is a CRM. And into my opinion, that's a very, let's say, reactive, dumb system. Salesforce is a nice tool and it looks very nice, etc. But it's the same as it was in 1995. It looks a little slicker, of course, and it looks nice, but it still does the same thing it did in 95. It wasn't even designed for sales. CRM was designed for invoicing. That's what CRM was intended for. And now you see a lot of things coming up, helping proactively to help a salesperson in their sales cycle. So things like sales automation, like companies like Outreach and SalesLoft. There's a lot of personal video that salespeople use. All kinds of online proposal software, sales enablement software like HighSpot, for example, is one of the examples, or Seismic is the other one. Those companies are already being used in the US a lot, but nowadays we see them within Europe as well. So we expect a strong growth there in 2022. And the other thing that we found out is our last trend is that we have made a lot of investments, or companies have made a lot of investments in MarTech the last years, but still 2/3 of B2B marketers expect to grow, to have an increased marketing budget next year. And the average marketing budget being around 10% of revenues, and that's expected to grow. So that was the kind of trends that we've seen. Back to you, Dominika.
Thank you, Elias. And that concludes the second part of this webinar. So we've already recapped the 2021. We made some predictions for the upcoming year. Before we move to the third part, I would like to remind our audience that we have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask our speakers, just type them down into the chat box and we will try to answer them all at the very end. And now let's move to the third and the last part. I would like to make all of those insights a bit more actionable, so our audience has specific tips that they can take out of this webinar. So having in mind all that was said today, what organizations should do actually to make their 2022 marketing strategies successful. And I would like to start with Christoph. Christoph, what would be your recommendations?
Yeah, I would say that I will follow what I've been said today, and I will use a very old school, I would say, marketing tactic, which is to use a preference center. I'm pretty sure you are all familiar with the preference center, but to make it simple for those who are not, the idea of the preference center is to find a way for a brand and a data subject to easily get a kind of understanding of what, as a data subject, I would prefer a brand share with me. So we can, of course, a brand can collect a consent. We were talking a lot about this consent banner, but a preference center is another way to collect a consent. We can also collect any, I would say, information regarding a topic as a data subject I'm interested in, as well as we can collect information regarding the frequency, the type of channel I do prefer, if I prefer to receive the mail instead of email, and so on and so forth. So, as I strongly believe, because we mentioned many times the rise of many regulation, and also the fact that the regulator will be pushing much more brands to be able to explain how they collect the information, and also how they manage to collect the consent and match boss. I strongly believe that a preference center as a very simple tool, again, which can be seen as a form or landing page, will be used by more and more brands, because it's very useful to collect information, but it's also very useful to maintain it, because at any point of time, if as a data subject, I want to change the way we are collecting information or the type of information I'm receiving from brand, it's quite easy to, if I have a page, which can be seen again as an agreement between me as a data subject and a brand, to refer to in order to change it and adapt it. And that's something I strongly believe. So as part of today, we've seen at Skelly, but I'm pretty sure that more and more vendors will be doing that as well. More and more CDP vendor linking directly either some, I would say, ready to use preference center, or putting on the top of their CDP solution a module which can be used to build custom preference center, because any brand will be collecting different type of data, in order again to collect and unify such data at any point of time in terms of, I would say, data collection and data activation, and also to make sure that in case of any audit from a regulator or from an external agency, they could provide all the information regarding the fact that the data was collected at one point of time, how it was used, and at the end, obviously, if the customer was happy or not with such usage. So my word would be preference center.
Thank you, Christoph. Cornelius, what would be your tip for our audience for this upcoming year?
Yeah, I try to stay on the issue of data transfers, because it picks up on several things that the other panelists and myself talked about. And I have two ideas or thoughts that might be helpful for the audience. The first one is very pragmatic, but as mentioned, as all companies are now required their legal framework to switch from the old standard contractual clauses to the new one, I really strongly encourage everybody to, if they haven't done so, to really kick off a proper project and a proper overseen process to do so. So companies should know already which contractual partners they have in which jurisdictions and where data flows are happening outside the EU. And this needs to be properly mapped so that companies know exactly under which legal basis this is happening. And when you rely on the old standard contractual clauses to make sure that you switch to the new ones, the deadline given by the European Commission is December 2022. So we still have more or less exactly 1 year to do so. But as this requires signatures for the new SECs and some negotiations and agreements on supplementary measures, I can foresee that it is quite a big project and a big commitment in terms of administration organization. So very pragmatic. If companies haven't done so, kick off this project as soon as you can. The second point here that also relates to that, and this is more a thought I want to throw out there, has to do with data localization. So as a result of Schrems 2, what a lot of companies did, they said, okay, we have this ruling now. What we do as a non-EU provider, we just say, okay, we have servers in the EU. Customer can choose to store their services, their data in EU-based servers. Problem solved. And while I agree that this makes sense as an immediate reaction to the Schrems 2 ruling, I kind of want to highlight that, at least in my legal reading, data localization is not a silver bullet that solves all problems related to Schrems 2. This was also recently picked up on a tweet by the German Federal Commissioners for the Data Protection Authorities, Ulrich Kelber, who also mentioned that if a provider is outside the EU and he offers you to host your data on an EU-based server, you still need to assess if the provider falls under some other forms of national security laws that might allow some form of governmental access, or vice versa. You need to assess everything related to Chapter 5, so international transfers there. So just relying on data localization is not enough. And what my takeaway there is, what I would like to throw out there, is that companies really remember the risk-based approach of which is one of the fundamentals of GDPR, and by that really treating each data transfer on a case-by-case basis. Think about the technical measures you can implement, the contractual measures you can implement, the procedural measures that might help mitigate the risk, but don't rely on like a one-size-fits-all solution, for example, related to data location.
Thank you, Cornelius. Elias, what would you recommend our audience?
So there is a lot has been said already regarding data, and I think the conclusion I make here is that having your data in order is your basis for success next year. So for the companies that we typically help, we advise to have their data infrastructure architecture, or DIA, in order. So you need to know where your data is, and you need to know how those tools are integrated. So doing that is easier said than done, of course. But to help you a bit, there is what we typically do is identify your KPIs, so your marketing KPIs, identify what kind of tools you currently have. So what marketing tools do you have in place, and where your gaps are. And then you need to find out how you can integrate those in order to have your data infrastructure back to where it belongs. And mind you that not all integrations are equal. So in the past, people would look for integrations as to, let's say, check marks on a website. You know, does it do integrations? Green or a check mark? Yes. Ask each vendor or ask for advice what the integration exactly means. So is it in the integration based on what kind of let's say APIs, or is it a native integration? Is it through a third party? If it's a third party, is it hosted in the EU? Is it hosted in the US, etc.? So there's things that Cornelius also pointed out, is like if it's hosted in the EU, that's not automatically your answer to yes, it's okay. So you need to make sure that you have your SCCs in place, etc. But you need to have those integrations in place, have your data infrastructure architecture in place, and you know, I have a template available. Should anyone want to have a template on you how the data infrastructure should be, link me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email or whatsoever. I'll send that to you. That's no problem. But everything to have that in order. The last thing that I will point out is our benchmark pointed out that 60% of marketing departments don't have enough knowledge about marketing analytics, so data and analytics. Make sure you invest in that knowledge. So you can buy all the tools that you want, you know, but you need to have the knowledge first. So invest in your knowledge of data and analytics. So that would be my advice for next year.
Thank you, Elias, and thank you for your offer of reaching out to you. I'm sure our audience will try that and take you up on your offer. And now, Laura, maybe you would like to share some advice on what should our audience focus on, what should they do to make their strategies successful in the upcoming year?
Yeah, Dominica, so I've been referring to that NOIB campaign, and then the Belgian DPA looking into the IAB framework. So I would recommend monitoring those developments and adjust your cookie consent practices accordingly. Monitor how the market is responding. Also monitoring those enforcement efforts that I referred to, the litigation that's pending, so that you can adapt your practices. And if you're developing a cookie consent tool, consider whether you want to outsource that or develop that internally. It's probably a matter of resources, whether you have the knowledge and the budget, but if you do develop it internally, you have a bit more flexibility. But there's many external providers that can help you with implementing a good consent management solution. And then I've been referring to that lack of harmonization. So what you're also going to have to consider if you're developing a tool is whether you want to take a pan-EU approach or not. It depends on your business profile. If you're active in a specific jurisdiction, I would recommend following the local guidelines closely. But if you're more pan-EU, you're going to need to decide whether you want to take a bit of a risk-based approach or take no risk and then try to implement all the different guidelines all together, which can be a complicated thing to do. So those are just my quick recommendations for next year.
Thank you, Laura. And Maciej, what would be your recommendations for the winning strategy of 2022?
So if you haven't implemented your first-party data strategy and tools, that's probably last moment to do that. We know that this will be the future, no matter what kind of technology solutions will come into the market next year. And I think Elias made a lot of good points on that. So maybe I will mention the other thing that I think is important, and that's something that is closer to what we are doing at Piwik Pro. With the proper consent, you are probably going to collect less data, but that does not mean that you won't have any actionable data. You can follow the exemptions for analytics purposes to get this data on aggregate level without collecting individuals, without setting cookies, etc. And that has been done, such list has been done by CNIL, which shows it explicitly, and Piwik Pro is on this list, but there are also other vendors. And but there are also very similar guidelines, for example, by Danish Business Authority. So it looks like we are going in the direction that you can collect under certain circumstances, that this is only for your website, only for your use, without tracking individuals on aggregate level, that you can collect analytics data, and having this data and combining it with the data that you have and more in-depth for users who gave you consent is something that will definitely give you a better edge than just collecting the consent, the data for analytics from the users who gave the consent. So use that if you haven't implemented it yet, and yeah, be compliant. Don't get on the NOIB list.
Thank you, Maciej, and thank you, everyone. Actually, this was a very great portion of knowledge. I'm sure that our audience will appreciate that. And this also concludes the part in which you answer my questions, and we will move to the part where you answer our audience questions. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, this is a good time to type them down. I already see the first question, actually, so I will read this aloud, and any one of you who'd like to answer, please let me know and do. So someone says, we are using IAB's TCF framework. Should we turn to another consent framework provider now, or can we wait for the final decision by the Belgian DPA? Would any of you like to answer this question?
So maybe just on the fact that the decision isn't final yet, I mean, that's correct. It's not final yet. I had understood that the IAB is considering changing its framework to meet already, what is in the draft decision, which is, by the way, not public. So difficult to know exactly what the requirements would be. So I don't know if that helps in determining whether you want to shift to something else or if you want to wait. It might be a bit early to shift before you know exactly what the requirements are and whether IB can actually offer maybe a different version.
Thank you, Laura. Would anyone else like to add anything to what Laura already said? If not, then I will move to the next one. What types of supplementary measures do you recommend when assessing providers located in the US? Cornelius, maybe you would like to take this one.
Yes, maybe I can start try to answer that, and I'm sure Laura deals with that a lot as well. So feel free to add your thoughts here. So what I experience when we assess as a company vendors in the US, usually by now they know a lot about the requirements of Schrems 2 already. So usually you see a lot of the especially technical and contractual measures that are more common that they already offer you, which is great. One thing which I always believe in is very interesting is transparency reports on government access requests. So the companies are not allowed to tell you if they have a request specifically, but they are allowed to provide some statistics on that. And when we look at the tool and they have those aggregated statistics, and you see that in the last 5 years they only had a handful of government access requests, then this obviously has indications on our risk analysis compared to another tool provider who had like 5,000 government access requests. So this is something we look at a lot. What I personally really like are foreign canary clauses, where the provider gives you an update if they have not received a court-issued subpoena, for example. So without telling you what happened, you kind of figure out that the reality by yourself. So these are two best practices that I like to see. And I also believe that there's a lot of work in different industry bodies and associations happening that also provide more and more supplementary measures. So I believe the more brain power by all stakeholders goes into that, the more happy we are on figuring that out.
Thank you, Cornelius. Would anyone else want to add anything to that?
I think to add to Cornelius' point, I recently had some German people on the Marketing Technology podcast with on this same issue. So it all starts with the DPA or data processing agreement and combined with the standard contract clauses, so SCCs. So as Cornelius already pointed out, the major vendors typically have those at hand for you. So if you ask for a DPA with the SCCs, they will provide that. That doesn't mean they're all right. So you always need to check them, but most vendors have them at hand or can send them to you if you ask for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And when talking actually about standard contractual clauses, what would you advise to companies preparing for the end of the transition period?
You're asking me, Dominika, or?
It may be a question to you, but I'm directing it at all of you. So either you or maybe Cornelius as well.
I think Cornelius would be a better fit here. I don't do the legal advice typically, so Cornelius, maybe you can answer that question.
Yeah. What I can say is that what happened in practice. So the new SCCs, they were published in the beginning of June. Then there was this first transition period until the end of September this year, which says after September 27, you are not allowed to use the old SCCs for new contracts anymore. And then as of September this year until December next year, we have this second transition period, as I would like to call it, where we say, okay, now we have to switch all existing contractual agreements to the new set of standard contractual clauses. In practice, what happened, so we have can maybe share how we handle this, and this might be an answer to the question. We have mapped all our existing transfers and the according standard contractual clauses. And what you saw that a lot of the bigger providers, they themselves switched directly on September 27th by themselves. So they just send you an update and you need to confirm the change to the new SCC. So the larger providers, at least my experience, they are all there. What is a bit more tricky is when you rely on a lot of providers that don't have very huge legal departments because they either don't have the knowledge on the switch of the SCCs yet, or they haven't done so yet. So we have mapped that, and we start now going through that list and contacting the provider and doing that on a contact to contact basis, really, to switch to the new standard contractual clauses. And how we approach it there, we also reflect the risk-based approach. So there also we start with the providers that we think have the strongest impact on our overall data privacy strategy. And through that, we managed to go through all of them. We aim to have that done quite advanced of the December 27 deadline, because you never know how fast partners respond and how fast you get the agreements with them. So this is the way, we are handling this here at IO, and I think this is something that other companies might find helpful.
Thank you, Cornelius. We will be finishing very soon, as I see no more questions in our chat box. So if anyone still has any questions, there is still a chance to type them down. We did have, though, a small hello from France on our chat to greet you, and also a question about the recording. So I can answer that. Yes, there will be a recording that we will send afterwards, for sure. And with that, I think we may slowly finish. Do you guys have any last words or last remarks you'd like to make?
Yeah, I learned a lot from the rest of you. So thank you very much for the panel. It was a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. Very good discussion.
Thanks for hosting it.
And a
Thanks a
big
lot.
thank you from me as well. It was really, really great to host all of you. Even though we had a very small mishap during the webinar with the room that Elias was in, we still managed to create very, very good material for our audience. So thank you for that. As I said, we will send the recording and upload the webinar to our website as well. So thank you guys once again for being here, and have a great day.
Yeah, have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.